Godfrey Anderson. I'm in the Faculty of Education. My research areas are in classroom assessment and school-based assessment practices. So I look at kind of more what happens in the classroom, and right now I'm involved in kind of a policy analysis. But my heart is in culturally relevant assessment, which came out of my PhD thesis, and I'm very happy to be working with my partner and presenting today with Jodie Lane, who is in Nunatsiavut. Jodie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jodie Lane. I am the Director of Education with the Nunatsiavut Government's Department of Education and Economic Development. I was born just down the road. The day my mom was supposed to travel out to Goose Bay to wait and have me, I didn't want to leave, so I was born here in Makkovik. And born and raised, I only left to go and do my post-secondary and then returned. I always knew I wanted to return to preferably Makkovik, but anywhere in Nunatsiavut I would have been happy. My entire career, except for my first job out of university, which was a quick 9-month replacement, maternity leave replacement with the Child, Youth and Family Services, I knew that I wanted to be proactive, not reactive in people's lives. So I turned to education, and this is where I've spent my entire career with Nunatsiavut Government and the former Labrador Inuit Association. I'm super passionate about education, and especially culturally relevant education, because I would bet my entire career on it that the issues and struggles that our children are facing would be alleviated if we infuse more culture and language in their learning. And this is actually my first real official stab at research. Research has always had a sour taste in my mouth from years of researchers coming into our communities, not telling us what they're doing, taking information, going off and receiving accolades and wonderful awards for their research and everything, and we didn't know what was going on. So I really never thought I would ever do research, but further into the career, realizing how important it is and how valuable it is to have actual studies done on things that are concerning, so that we could use that to strengthen our arguments for change. So when Jennifer came to me with this idea, actually she asked me, what would you like to do research on? And I thought, oh, well, there's lots of things. And we came up with this idea. And it was such an eye-opener for me, the whole process. I have a new respect for what researchers do. And I will always now even more try my best to support research as it happens, especially in Nunatsiavut, because even a few years ago, if you were to search Inuit education Nunatsiavut, you don't find very much. You still don't, but we're doing more. We're squeaky wheel gets the grease, I guess. We're increasing our number of researchers coming up here and doing some wonderful work. So today we're going to present on our project, which is entitled Culturally Relevant Assessment Practices in Inuit Contexts, specifically in Nunatsiavut. This was a wonderful project that I still can't believe we did it, because it's something that's always bugged me about our assessment processes up here. We have our ways, we have our culture, we have our values, and we have a lot of strengths that don't come out in traditional westernized testing practices. Something as simple as the way a child interacts with their teacher. A lot of Inuit students are quiet and not very vocal. And if a teacher doesn't pick up on the fact that we say yes with our eyebrows, yep, you could ask a question. You may think your student is ignoring you or being hard to get along with, when really they're responding to you. They're letting you know, yes, I'm going to do that. Yep, kind of thing with their eyebrows. So anyway, we'll go through. Jennifer prepared some great slides that very well lay out our process. This first slide has a picture of the two of us here from our wonderful day. Was the most wonderful spring day that when she came up and we drove to Hopedale. So we were deciding how we were going to visit all the communities, and I said, if we can time it right, if you get to Makkovik, we do the Makkovik sessions and whatnot, and then if we time it right, let's drive to Hopedale on Skidoo, and I'll take the kids out of school and we'll go. So this is what we did. Do you want to start the slides?
Sure.
Okay, so I guess where this comes from, as many projects have been coming now since the TRC, it's called upon all educators and the system itself to integrate Indigenous knowledge systems. And this is something I'm seeing on a number of different projects and things that I'm working on, and it's great to see. It's great to see that people are taking this seriously, that we need to actually do this. And it's not just a Band-Aid thing, or it's not just a box to tick off, but to really integrate our knowledge into the systems. So classroom assessments is one that I think myself, and maybe it's just because it didn't occur to me right away, but the assessment side of education is one that's a lot of times forgotten. And I think we're so focused on getting culture into our learning and getting language into our learning and giving the children opportunities for experiential growth and learning and deep learning and all these new catchphrases, that we forget about the assessment practices, that a lot of times we're still expecting them to go back to their classroom and sit at a desk and write a paper or do a test. And it doesn't fully capture all the things that they may have learned in these experiences that they've had, or in the new curriculum that's so rich with culture and language. If the assessment practice doesn't align with the content, then it's not it. Why have that content there if you're not actually showing that the children have learned it, right? So we wanted to look at what's there now, how it's being done, and how we could possibly put culture into it, or if culture is already being put into it, because we do have a number of really great teachers. Next slide. So just for some context, Nunatsiavut Government is an Inuit self-government. We were the last Inuit region to sign our land claims agreement. So it completed the full 4 regions of Inuit Nunangat and our land claims agreements in December 2005. I was actually on mat leave with my son, so it was a very different perspective, seeing it from kind of like the outside. I wasn't in the trenches, so to speak, but we were still a part of it, and it was really exciting. So with that comes our authority. With our constitution, with our land claims agreement, we have the authority to take over, I guess, control, for lack of a better word, of our K-12 early childhood education systems. I'm super interested, and that's my goal. By the time I'm done my career, I want to say that we have our own K-12 system. It's slow going. This is not something we rush into. This is not a switch we can flick and everything changes. This is where pieces of work like what Jennifer and I have done will really be key, because these significant changes that have to be made all have to be explored and researched and things like that. So if we want to change the way we evaluate and assess our students' work and their learning, then these kinds of pieces of work will be very valuable for that. So I'll be thanking Jennifer for years to come now, as we get further along in the process of assuming control of the schools, when it comes to looking at how we're going to have what our evaluation process is going to look like. And in Nunatsiavut, we represent the 5 communities here up on the north coast of Labrador, which is Nain, Hopedale, Postville, Makkovik, and Rigolette. So those are the schools that we have here, but we looked, for the purposes of this project, we focused on 3. We focused on Nain, Makkovik, and Hopedale. So we wanted to look at, are the assessment practices that are currently being used serving the children now? Is it really showing what they know and what they've done? And can things change, I guess? So, I mean, you can read the research questions there. Are assessment practices developing attributes defined by the global competencies or the core values of the Indigenous education evaluation framework? Those are the two pieces that guided this work. And can current assessment practices be informed through research into the assessment practices in Nunatsiavut context? This is where we're really hoping that teachers look at this work and say, hey, it's doable, you know. And we're seeing some changes. We've developed a course, a history course, we being Nunatsiavut Government. We developed, it's called Labrador Inuit Society and Culture. And that entire course has no testing, no papers. It's just project based. The entire course is group and or individual pieces of work, not no tests. That was one of the things I that was one of my suggestions right from the get-go with that course development was no testing. I want students to have different opportunities to show their learning, and I don't want to show that they've memorized facts. I want to show that they've learned. So that was key. This picture here is a picture of my son on that trip. I believe we found some bear tracks on one of the paths that we had to cross a few necks, and we came across fresh bear tracks. So they weren't very, I think they may have been only a couple of hours old. This particular day, I'll just speak to some of the pictures as we go along. It was really great. I was so glad Jennifer was with us because she got to really 100% experience a true day of education from both of my children. At the time, my goodness, I can't even remember how old they were. 12 and 14, I think, around those ages. No, maybe even 11 and 15. I don't know. But the whole day was learning. I mean, it was a spring day in May. So the kids got to see the ice getting watery throughout the day, and we chased seals and we chased geese and we looked at landmarks and we talked about tracking and things like that. So here we stopped to, when my husband saw, he was on the head, so when he saw the tracks, we stopped and had a look, and my son was very intrigued. So anyway, it was just a jam-packed day. I'll let Jennifer take this one because the theoretical perspective is a bit more in her shop.
So really, I think you just spoke to it, Jodie. With Jodie and I positioned in this research, what we were doing was our research tells a story of how we have these two worlds working together through the content of what we're delivering in the classrooms in Nunatsiavut and how we're evaluating that content. And it's happening, these two kind of, I don't want to say two separate worlds, they're not two separate worlds, but they are two worlds that are interacting. And Nunatsiavut is right now running the curriculum that is constructed in Newfoundland, in St. John's, Newfoundland, and running evaluations that are also developed in St. John's, Newfoundland. So it's so our research, then we had Jodie and I, who, even though I am a northerner from the other side of the country, but I am a northerner, so I have that insight. My hometown is very much like Jodie's hometown. And so I'm well aware of what it's like to have my world run by the South. In my case, it was Vancouver and Victoria. But so what Jodie, our research was, we have me positioned in St. John's, Jodie and Makovic, and the schools in Makkovik in northern Labrador, and the governance in southern St. John's, and we told the story through driving the landscape, and exemplified how the content of Nunatsiavut that can arise from the land, and the evaluations that take place in that learning can be very much locally based. So that is the two I'd seen. And we also we framed it within academic research of cultural kind of positioning, and recognizing the relational accountability of research, and framed within Western qualitative research methods. So we have these two worlds interacting throughout this research, and the paper is told that way. It's told through a story, and it's also told through traditional qualitative research format. Jodie, you want to keep going?
Sure. So our participants in the research, we talked to teachers and parents, especially our language teachers in our 3 schools, in Nain, Hopedale, and Makkovik, as I mentioned, the principals, vice principals of those 3 schools. So we had a survey, we had focus groups, and we had interviews with all these participants, and this was my eye-opener, the classification and the coding of all the data and everything like that. So it was such a great learning experience for me, but at the same time, it really gave me appreciation to how much work goes into actual research when you read a report, all the stuff that's behind it and what backs it up. So it gave me more of a, I guess, comfort knowing that I can trust a bit research, because the things that are written come from all this data that's collected, and I knew that, having taken research methodology courses and stuff in my undergrad, but actually participating in it and doing it, it gave me a whole new appreciation. So I'm very thankful for that. This was one of our pit stops along the way. In that last picture, I think we stopped for a lunch, but yeah, this is about halfway between Hopedale and Makkovik. It was such a beautiful day. All right, we'll carry on. Here's my son stopping to eat some spring red berries, we'll call it, because it's just from the ground that's thawed out, and the berries are super, super juicy. So I'm not one to eat straight red berries. or partridge berries, as many people know them, I guess. But he loves the sourness, so he was just had his belly full. So while there is recognition that students need Western knowledge, we know that the culture plays a huge part, and I guess the focus in schools a lot is not on the culture, when the realization, I think a lot of teachers don't realize yet, that by bringing culture in, it enhances the Western knowledge that you want to share and you want to teach. So I always use math as an example. I'm very, right now, one of our main focuses is putting more culture into the current learning, because we're not ready to take over the school system yet. So we are developing curriculum and resources. So I spoke to our high school course that we have. We're now in the process of creating a brand new high school course called Everyday Life Skills, which covers all the things that you wish you learned in high school that you didn't, that you need to know to live out in the real world. So we're developing that course with a cultural content. We are looking at a science high school course now and starting the early stages of research and development for that. But as well, we're taking a lot of the content from our history course and creating new resources for K-9 social studies. So that the students aren't going to just only see themselves when they hit grade 10, 11, or 12 in our history course. They're going to now see themselves in their learning and hear familiar place names and surnames in questions and activities, and learn about their laws and their communities and things in a whole new way, not just having 1 or 2 pictures in their textbook show Labrador, and the rest of it be the rest of Atlantic Canada. We're focused solely up here in Nunatsiavut. So that's a very exciting program. And when we get to math, I'm very, before I'm retired, I want us to have math courses that are and those are relatively easy because the math doesn't change. The math is math, but how you teach that math. So if you're sitting down talking to students about train A and train B, or so many pineapples and so many avocados, how many do you have, and all these sorts of things. If you change just the perspective and you start using familiar words and familiar pictures, and you're talking about a skidoo leaves Postville at this speed going this direction, and a skidoo leaves from Makovic, where are they going to meet? You know, kids are going to get that math because they can relate to the skidoos and the places. Trains mean nothing to us up here because we've never seen one. I didn't see a train.
So if I can just interject here,
Yep.
if something that we, as part of our research, what we did was a document analysis of curriculum, and we found very little and no references that are relatable to, based on keyword searches, that are relatable to Nunatsiavut. So
Yeah.
and to contextualize this within assessment, if you are assessing something, you need to have a construct or an objective that are, you know, that are built into the curriculum in order to hang that evaluation off of. And if there isn't that content there that is relevant to Labrador, and this is not new information. This story has been told in a number of different places across Canada for many years. But it is new because we have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission now telling us that we need to integrate this information into our curriculum, and it's not there now. So Jodie, you know, that's all I wanted to say, Jodie, is like my background pre-academics was in measurement and large-scale assessment, and that is dependent on those constructs in the curriculum. So it has to start there. So I'll leave that. I'll go back to you again, Jodie.
Yeah, no, the point I was getting was that there's that the relevance of what the kids are learning is not there. And so it's hard for them to be assessed effectively, right? So they may get the gist of what they're learning, but it could be so much further enriched if we were to teach them in a way that they connected better. And then on top of that, assess them in a way that brings out what they've learned. So the issues of this, I have to talk to this picture. This is the time of the night that we got back from Hopedale. We left Jennifer in Hopedale because she was going to fly on to Nain the next day. And we left that early evening on late spring, so we could have had daylight the whole way home. We, of course, ran into skidoo troubles. And what normally would take us about no more than 2 hours, because the ice conditions now were not the greatest, where the day's sunlight had made a lot of water on the ice. So we knew it was going to be slower going. It took us 4.5 hours to get home because of skidoo troubles. But the only silver lining was that when we were stopped at the shack along the way, one of the trail shacks, Lucas got that goose, and it was such a amazing thing to watch, because we were also in such a bad mood because we were already 2 hours in. We were only halfway, and I was annoyed. My husband was annoyed. My daughter was annoyed. We weren't cold. It was a warm evening, but it was so annoying, and we were frustrated, and we were bickering at one another. And then all of a sudden, Lucas says, "Stop!" And we could hear very faintly a cronk of a goose. And he, at the time, before his voice changed, did a spot-on goose call, right? Without the goose call thing. He did it just with his own voice, and he starts cronking, and the goose cronks back, and it's like a conversation, and he's running. He grabs his father's shotgun because it was the easiest one to get. He grabs the shotgun off the side of the skidoo, and he takes off because we saw a silhouette of the goose coming right over us, and Lucas knew that there was a pond because of his experiences. He was only a young teenager, very early years, but he had already traveled this route with his father, so he knew that there was a pond. And so he takes off towards the pond, and he's cronking as he's going, and the goose is cronking back to him, and it's cronk, 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 and it's just my husband and I both stop, and we're just looking at each other, and we pause, and we hear a shot pretty quickly, and my husband said, "Damn it, he shot too early," and it was silence, and then we hear, "Woohoo!" And Cyril takes off on the skidoo, and Lucas is out in the pond grabbing the goose, and it was a beautifully fat spring goose. It was so it changed the whole mood of the rest of the trip, and the other 2.5 hours to get home didn't seem so bad because we had this guy tied to the back of the skidoo. So that whole bit of like that itself is not even recognized as education, according to traditional systems and traditional assessments. However, Lucas is constantly, and my daughter as well, Marin, are constantly bringing these experiences into their learning. And slowly teachers are starting to recognize that, well, yes, that's something that's relevant, and that's definitely something that we can bring into this here, but they have to be given either training or actual physical processes to be able to integrate the culture into the assessment pieces. So that's really exciting. And this year, one of Lucas's teachers actually, they're teaching skilled trades, and what a wonderful course to teach anyway, but what a wonderful course to infuse culture into. So Lucas is at home, and he traps. He has some traps, and he has a little trap line far into the country. I shouldn't say little trap line. And he's been getting foxes and martens so far this year. And he wanted to build a specific size komatik box for his traps so that he doesn't have to take this huge komatik with him. So he makes this komatik, the runners, the boards, the box, the lacing, the tow bar, the shoeing, the whole works. And he tows it to school to show his teacher. And the teacher immediately is like, "You're getting credit for that. I'm going to give you credit on your skilled trades for that. You're getting marked for that." And not only that, but he asked Lucas, he said, "Well, would you teach the Comedic building section of this course then?" So now Lucas had to put together a list of materials, and he's preparing his lesson plan so that he can teach his classmates how to build a Comedic. So COVID, of course, has kind of thrown a wrench into that, but they're getting ready to soon do that. So that is an example of right there how effective just accepting and utilizing culture is in assessment. Lucas is having such a great time in school now because not only is he enjoying what he's learning, he's applying those skills in that class to other classes, and he's feeling very proud and valued. So that there is just a tip of the iceberg of the potential of bringing culturally relevant assessment practices into your learning or into your classroom. I totally didn't talk about our issues with measurement. Jennifer,
That's
what did I
okay.
miss here?
If you don't mind, I'll pick that up.
Yep, there you go, please. Thank you.
Based on what Jodie just said, and the two stories that she told of Lucas, building his Comatic and also capturing or shooting that spring goose. Now, I said earlier that assessment needs to have a construct or some measurable objective in order to kind of be able to report on, to isolate a criteria to measure and report on. And so how do you do that in real experience? And if you you look at the experience of Lucas building the Comatic or shooting that goose, or of Marin, Jodie hasn't told the story of how we actually did shoot a seal on our trip across, and took it apart, skinned it, took the meat with us, and how her little girl spent the whole time inspecting the different organs of the animal, and with her father's instruction. And Lucas then, and then to go back to the goose story, Lucas then brought the goose back to his nan. I think you said, Jodie, is that right? When you got back to the community, it went to his nan. The seal meat was shared throughout the community. So to get back to the measurable constructs, well, how do you do that in such a rich learning experience? Well, right now, our systems, our school systems are kind of are shifting towards what are called global competencies or 21st century skills, which include things like citizenship, communication, interpersonal relationships, creativity, those kind of higher order skills that are very difficult to measure. But if you look at the experiences that we are telling in this particular research project, they're throughout the experiences. And if going back to the two-eyed seeing, if Western nations and the competencies are being directed by the OECD, if Western nations are actually retooling their curriculum to target these higher order competencies, then perhaps there's a way that land-based learning and we can learn, and I say we, I mean Western educators can learn from the experiences of land-based learning and how formative evaluations like we experienced between Lucas and his father with the rifles and Marin and their father with the guiding through the learning of the internal organs of the seal, how those can be evaluated and shared in a meaningful way to everyone, because that is the purpose of evaluation in the context of learning. There are many purposes, but we need to talk more about that and to open up the conversation of evaluation practices beyond measure, report, and the formative piece that we're always talking about, which is also problematic as well, and that's in our article. So, Jodie. Sorry, I get on. It's an important topic, and I think it goes to the heart of this, because if we're reporting on what we value in the system, we definitely need to retool that reporting system as well. So that's not just the large scale assessments. That's our what we value as far as how we're reporting back to our parents. What is important to report on? Is it discrete skills that are outlined in the curriculum that don't match the cultural context, or are they the higher order skills that we say our whole education system should be formed around being citizenship? And we're not reporting on those.
No. And I mean, as a parent, to me, a number beside a subject area means nothing. It doesn't tell me what kinds of learning was happening, what kinds of things that they are what kind of skills they're developing, but the narratives that come sometimes beside the comment section that tells me something about my child, or when I get a phone call from the teacher that says, hey, do I have your permission to let Lucas teach the class because of this skill that he has that I want to support or to share or whatever. Those are the things to me as a parent that are really beneficial to report on, because now I that gives me more to talk to my child about, rather than what does this number beside religion or what does this number beside math mean, which they have no clue on. They know that they've scored certain numbers on tests, but all that tells us is that they had these many questions wrong, or they lost this many points, whether it's memorization or so we don't know if it's that their memory didn't work or that they don't understand, like, so yeah, it's something that we definitely need to be considering more. So we'll go to the next slide. Here they are again. Look how small they are. Oh my gosh. I keep thinking this was like last spring and it's been like years. So our methods of evaluation, I guess, they align with the curriculum and our best practices of measurement theory. We when Jennifer and I started this, we talked about it for a long time, and I said to her, and she said to me the same thing. It was just like, we know what the results are, but there's no research done on this to show the results. We knew that if you infuse, like I've seen it so many times, all the things that I remember from school, the more the stronger memories, the lessons that have stuck with me are the ones that I learned from my life skills teachers or my Inuktitut teachers that really connected to my learning. So it's something that's been always there, and it was really good to finally sit down with teachers and hear their stories of the same. When we talked to parents, a lot of them were my age, few years older and younger, but all had similar experiences of their learning as well, and remembering more about when the cultural pieces were involved and how valuable that was. And so it's kind of like it was reassuring to kind of get this work done to prove, I guess, that all of these assumptions and knowledge we already had was in fact valid. I don't know if you had any more to add there, Jennifer.
No, it's just I mean the results are based on talking to the communities. Oops, sorry. Talking to the communities. So we talk to principals, we talk to teachers, we talk to parents, and we talk to students as well. So these are themes and that came out of these conversations, and we ran a survey as well through all the schools.
Yeah.
So and did document searches. So I think if anything, from my perspective, that needs to, can be done immediately is to look at the curriculum and look at those objectives and the skills that are expected within the content areas, and make sure that they are relevant to the local jurisdiction. And I'm not talking about St. John's or the island of Newfoundland. I mean, we shouldn't be running problems that are based on yellow school buses in Makkovik. And I mean, that's just content. It's also method as well that we reflect on. Teaching methods and evaluation methods. So I'll stick to that. So running records, we expect students to be conversant, equally conversant in their description of their understanding of a reading passage. And we know that that's not always the case when we're skipping between cultures. Reading records, I started teaching in New Zealand, and that's where running records came from. And what they are is the student will read a passage, and then as they're reading, the teacher will underline mistakes or skipped words. And then at the end, the teacher will ask comprehension type questions. So the students in Nunatsiavut are doing these running records to check reading ability and comprehension. And the content is not relevant, but also it runs deeper than that, because we're expecting, we're measuring their comprehension based on how they interact with their teachers. And whether they're Maori students in New Zealand, they're kids in one of the schools in St. John's, or kids in Nunatsiavut, there are going to be differences in the way that they interact with their teachers, cultural norms that aren't picked up by the teacher asking comprehensive questions. So that's just one example that came up in our research about the methods of evaluation as well. So You know, it's something, and formative assessment, for example, and I'm just looking at the time here. Formative assessment, we expect students to advocate for themselves. So we can say, okay, well, you know, the positive side of formative assessment is you give the students the outcomes, and they have targets set that they can they know where their path is to achieve those targets. And along the way, there's interaction between the teacher and the student. And at the end, students may self-assess, for example, and say, okay, I should have this grade. And I remember myself when I was told to evaluate something that I did, and I was like, oh my God, I feel I was taught to be humble. How am I supposed to actually write? I should get 95% on this. And that is something that came up as well, is, okay, we're teaching kids self-advocacy. This is not what we do. This is, you know, so there are all kinds of these, you know, practices that we need to have a look at. Sorry,
So,
Jodie.
and no, and I just wanted to add that there were some shining stars, of course, that you find probably in most research. We have a couple of teachers that were already doing these wonderful things and looking at and knowing their students. And I think it has there's a difference as well in if the teacher is local, and or versus if they're from away, and if the teacher is from away, how long they've lived there, and the relationship that they have with the student, because there's some really great teachers here who came from outside of Nunatsiavut, whether it's from other parts of Labrador or Newfoundland or elsewhere, but because they've come into the community and embraced the culture and really do their best to reflect the children's culture in the learning and the assessment, it's making a real difference. And the children see that and appreciate that. So their relationship with that particular teacher may be even better than sometimes with a local teacher. So that perspective is really interesting to see as well. And it was really great to hear some of the teachers' best practices that they're already implementing, but also some of their own struggles of they wish that there was, you know, I wish that there was something else here. I wish we didn't have to use this that came out of St. John's, or I wish the resources were a bit more culturally relevant so it would help me assess them better. So it was really a wonderful experience. And I think that this putting assessment kind of in the forefront, where it often sits kind of forgotten in the back, I think is really great, because we can teach and we can provide all these wonderful learning experiences, but at the end of the day, there still has to be some form of assessment in order to grade and progress. And until such time as that system doesn't exist anymore and we just don't have assessments, then we need to figure out how we're going to do them better.
And just before we end, I just want to make a point that I don't think we didn't set out to paint everyone with the same brush. So, for example, the verbal volubility, you know, I mean, we didn't, we're careful about saying, okay, well, all students in Nunatsiavut will not self-advocate. But these are flags, these are indications that, okay, this is an area, this is something that we need to address. So I just wanted to add that little point in there. Big point, but okay. So
did you want to conclude?
well, I'll do the OECD part, and then I'll let you conclude, Jodie. But the OECD, and back to the global competencies of you know, communication and citizenship and these other constructs that are very difficult to measure, are being written into curriculum across Canada. So BC has changed their curriculum, so everything falls underneath each of the competencies. Alberta did it, but then now with this government, they've kind of canceled that. Newfoundland is looking at it. That was pre-pandemic. So it's and our Council of Ministers of Education Canada highlight the competencies as the guiding principles of the education system in Canada, because education is provincial. I'm hoping that the research into how to evaluate these more it's trickier to evaluate creativity, and although there's been a lot of research in that area, but citizenship and communication and localizing global trends, your ability to synthesize information, for example, those are harder to evaluate, but they're not impossible. And when we look at the land-based activities that are going on in Nunatsiavut, maybe there's something that the Western world can learn from the practices that are happening in the rural areas of Canada. And so I hope to continue this work. And I just want to thank Jodie for being so fabulous at her job at trying to retool the Northern education system to reflect Northern life and needs for the future. Because we can all learn how to live more closely with our environment, as we know from the IPCC reports that are coming out constantly saying, the environment is we are not living within our means with the environment. So.
And I really wanted to thank Jennifer for bringing this to me and giving me this opportunity. This was wonderful to do and experience. I'm so glad that my kids got to participate that day, because it kind of gave them a taste of some things that we can do too. They didn't see so much of the research side, but they did see all the work I did at home afterwards. So they kept saying, "You're still working on that stuff with Jennifer?" And I said, "Yeah, it doesn't happen overnight." So the whole process was wonderful. But I go back to education in the Indigenous world was never formalized. It was always informal, but it was a means of survival. And the way you assessed how well you taught your children was that they survived. So we have to go back in a little bit and take a step back to say, maybe it's not always so important that there's a grade or a mark or a this or that to report on, but the fact that, again, these things that are hard to measure, they're hard to measure maybe on paper, or they're hard to quantify. But when you've got children coming home from a weekend at the cabin, and the first thing they do is run to the elders' houses and bring eggs or bring seal meat, or they're coming home from cutting wood and they drop some off to a man who doesn't have a skidoo, and they do these things without looking for praise, without putting a selfie on Facebook, without all these other things that seem to kind of overshadow the real learning. And if we look at, if we take a page out of that book and kind of take a step back and say, okay, maybe it's not so important that we got to put a number beside this subject, but a yes or a no. Did they do good? Are they going to survive? Are they going to did they get what they needed to get out of this class? Yes or no? And I think sometimes it's way easier said than done. But these projects, these research initiatives will all help to bring us one step closer to changes that we need to make. So thank you, Jennifer. This was wonderful, and I hope to continue working with you too.
Thank you very much. We do have a question, the Q&A. This is Justina. I'm just going to read it out loud. Do you have suggestions for how we can make assessment culturally appropriate for Indigenous students at the post-secondary level? Applying conventional rubrics, for instance, what may be an alternative?
I know that some successes are already taking some successes just from when we did and Jennifer's familiar with our Inuit Bachelor of Education program. I know, and from speaking to students who were in that program, that one of the ways that they were given, I guess, autonomy over their assessment. They were able to choose what best fit them. And we can use that as a personal thing, but also as a cultural thing. We had a student who was a brilliant artist, but she really struggled writing formal papers. So she was given the opportunity many times to create a piece of art and then explain the art based on the project, and not pressured to, no, you still have to write a 20-page paper with MLA format or whatever. So that recognized her strengths, and it allowed her to bring her culture into it, because the majority of her artwork is culturally based on her life and whatnot. So I think just sometimes opening up the door and allowing a student to choose and suggest and discuss. It doesn't have to be just I'm not going to do an assessment. I choose not to be assessed. But it can be just having that opportunity to have another way that they better fit to showing you that they what you need to assess. Jennifer?
Well, I would say it's also, not also, but just to kind of carry on with that, is to look at the objectives of your course and to say, okay, well, okay, are they capturing the what I want to convey, or the meaning of my course, but also the people that I'm serving with my course. And the way that I chose, or my measurement instruments, are they actually measuring that construct? So, for example, you have an objective. As Jodie said, do you need to have a test in order to show that the students have reached that objective? It's sometimes maybe. But that's something I would say, look at your objective and look at how you're measuring that objective. That's what your measurement should do. That's what your evaluation should do. They should target those objectives.
Jodie, there was a follow-up question for you regarding the student who you said was assessed through her artwork. Was that still graded? And if so, how?
I can't speak to how it was graded. I just know that she was. And that was the way that that particular instructor allowed all the students. They could choose if they wanted to write a paper, or they could do a piece of artwork, or they could do a verbal explanation. They could do an iMovie. They were just giving all these different options of how to answer the question. If it was or to produce the work, right? So I know it was graded. I just don't know what that particular instructor, what their methodology was for grading. But as long as the information was as long as it was shown to the instructor that yes, that student understood the assignment, sort of thing, that I know that student did really well.
Thank you. If anybody has any questions or final comments, there are a couple of ways you can indicate it. You can either raise your hand and I could give you the option to unmute yourself and ask that using audio, or you can put it in the chat or in the Q&A. We do have a few minutes left.
Just while you're doing that, the MUN grading rubric allows for a lot of flexibility because they're descriptive categories. So I think it's, just off the top of my head, because we are forced in university to give grades. So how do we do that? Well, if the MUN grading rubric in their categories will say, well, this is exceptional, this is developing. So that's another kind of tool to have a look at if it might suit your particular context. Allow some flexibility within a very, that percentage scale is very problematic.